the first sergeant met us at the train and said, "Don't unpack, we're leaving in the morning." So the next morning at 7 o'clock, we left in a convoy and went back, guess where? To the Volturno Valley. That's the Army.
So did you stay there?
We stayed there for about 5 or 6 weeks. They had an idea that we could be a cadre for a camp that redeployed troops. Now let me explain redeployment. Everybody, they had a point system, and for every year you were in the service you got so many points, and for every month you were overseas you got so many points and whatever. And the original deal was anybody with 100 points was due to come home, which was the mass majority of the troops overseas. Well, they didn't have the capacity to bring them all home at once. So they had to bring them home and as the capacity became available. So they had to do something with them between the war and the time they came home. So they set up some camps where they did something with the troops, and this camp that we went to back in the Volturno Valley was supposed to be one of those camps, but they never sent us any troops. So then after 5 or 6 weeks of luxury living, because there were like 300 of us drawing rations for 10,000 troops, we had ice cream and donuts, unheard of things. They sent us to Rome. Outside of Rome, the Italians, before the war, were building a World Series. a World's Fair. And the beautiful buildings and whatever were turned into military barracks, of course, when they got into the war. And we were stationed there. That was just on the outskirts of Rome. Chickenola. If you can spell it, I can't. But it was a suburb of Rome. And we were in the cadre for these troops who were being redeployed. And that's why this show bar was built. Now there's a story there. To have something to do at night, I drove officers to town for recreation. And one night I was assigned to a first lieutenant, and I had never driven a first lieutenant. I always had majors and colonels and the senior officers. And I thought, this is strange that I drew this guy. Well, I picked him up, and he was an officer. Anyway, I wasn't impressed. And I said, where to, Lieutenant? Excelsior? He said, no, let's just drive around. So we drove around a while, and he took me to a senior officers club where we took off our insignia and went in. I was 18 years old, and here I am in the senior officers club with all these generals. We didn't stay long, but he turned out, when we drove around, we talked, and he was very clever, older than me, of course, and more experienced, and he drew me out, as it were, and got me to tell about my high school experience. It was during the war, and a shortage of gasoline, and even though we had a band, and a big band and a good band, which won a national contest, we didn't have the gasoline to go to football games and basketball games out of town. So we formed a little 5-piece pep band. So anyway, he got me bragging about all the things we did in high school. And since I played an instrument that wasn't a dance band instrument, I learned how to be the front man, the MC, as it were. And when we did programs, I did the emceeing. And told him all this and probably exaggerated. The next night, I was assigned to the same man. I had never driven the same officer twice. So I knew there was something smelling. So anyway, I picked him up and I said, "Where to tonight, Lieutenant?" And he said, "You remember last night I told you we were going to build a show, a place to have shows?" And he said, "We're further along, and we thought, as a matter of fact, we're opening tonight." I said, "Fine, can we go?" He said, "Yes, we're going to go because you're going to be the MC." Now here I was, and just khaki. I wasn't even a private first class. I was still a buck private. Well, I went to the show and I met the stage manager, who was Italian. All the acts were Italian. Now you got to remember, again, during the war, the circuses were only just local groups anymore, and most of the great circus acts come from Europe. So they had all this talent available, and the war is just over, and there's some travel available. So anyway, we had, I called it a vaudeville type show, which is what it was. We had muscular, strong men, and jugglers, and singers, and comedians, and whatever, but they were all Italian. So I met this stage director in the back, and I was told that he spoke English and I wouldn't have any problem. Well, he didn't have any problem, but I had lots of problems because he had a heavy accent and I couldn't understand what he was saying. And he handed me a list of the names of the different acts and what they did. And by the time he handed me that, it was time for the first act. So I got pushed onto the stage, and I went out to introduce this act. And it was one of these 12-letter Italian names. I'm a country boy from Kentucky. I don't know from nothing about Italian. Well, I tried to pronounce it. Of course, I butchered it badly. Well, everybody laughed. Well, instead of being embarrassed, I laughed with them. Told them I didn't know anything about it. But anyway, the whole deal, I thought any time they were going to put the hook out and hook me off the stage, or at least they were going to throw me out. Well, at intermission, I got a note to go out to table so-and-so, and I figured, here's where I get my chewing. So I went out to table so-and-so, and there was a table of 8 GIs, and I walked up and introduced myself, and I said, "Did someone here send a note for me?" And this fellow looked at me and said, "Yeah, I did." I said, do I know you?" He said, "No." "Yeah, you should. Don't you remember me?" And called me by name. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't." He said, "Well, my name is something Staples, and I used to be secretary of the YMCA when you were down trying to learn how to swim." And so anyway, they bought me a drink, and that kind of relaxed me a little. Well, I went back to the second show and went through the same routine, mispronounced everything, and just tried to carry it off. I figured, well, I'm rid of this job. After the show was over, they brought me a bottle of champagne, which I'd never had. And the fact of the matter is, hadn't had many drinks at that age. And they told me that I did a great job. They thought that was part of my act. And they believed me, it was just naivety on my part. So anyway, I was asked to be permanent MC of this thing, and I still had my daytime duties, which was driving for the officers club, officers mess.